I think people would like to hear kind of like what your like emotional state was as the Cowboys-Seahawks game drew to a close last night. Is Dak Prescott going to win this game? And obviously he played great whether they won or lost. But are the Cowboys going to win this game? What were you thinking here with your Dak Prescott MVP ticket watching the end of the football game last night where Dallas could have very easily fouled it up and ended up losing like a heartbreaker by 1 point?
Yeah, well, I mean, the Seahawks, you knew it was problematic when the Seahawks scored at the end of the first half, and didn't kick a field goal, like scored a touchdown at the end of the first half, 21-20. You knew they got the ball first. You knew Dallas's defense, especially their secondary, especially defensive player of the year candidate Deron Bland had some issues last night in coverage. And I mean, that's RIP that candidacy. It lasted like 0 seconds because who was ever even thinking this was going to happen? Anyway, so they were having some trouble. So I mean, it's 28-20, and I'm sitting there and look, like the good thing about, even at that point, even at 28-20, the good thing about the game was like Dak was cooking the whole game. Like from drive one, he looked awesome. And what you're hoping for if you're holding the MVP ticket, like, yeah, you want the Cowboys to win. They need to win the game. But you also need them to win like a high scoring game that he plays really well in. Like if they win and Pollard runs really well, he didn't really gain a whole lot. So even at 28-20, I'm like, well, he's going to throw it a ton in the second half. He's going to pass on every drive, like the maximum number of plays. And, I think there's a chance for him to have a really good performance. Now, he didn't have like legendary numbers because the Seahawks had so many penalty yards that Dak's passing yards are actually like kind of unimpressive given the scoreline of the game. But like as good a data point, as good a game as you could hope for if you were holding the ticket. Like what would you have entering the game last night? You're holding Dak MVP at a big price. What would you have wanted to happen? You would want the Cowboys to win. I think you would want it to be dramatic and for Dak to like be a hero, honestly, as opposed to just like put away a bad Seahawks team and win by margin. You get the best case scenario. They win 41-35. He looks awesome. He comes on the set after the game with everybody. They're talking about being a girl dad. They're like hyping him up. The crowd is chanting MVP while he's on the set. NFL's Twitter account tweets out, is he in the MVP conference? Like you got 100% of anything you could have hoped for last night. That doesn't mean he's going to win, but just like that was everything you could have hoped for if you were holding that ticket.
And this MVP race right now feels like Federer Nadal, like Wimbledon final 2008. Like Hurts had the great shot last week at the end of the game against Buffalo, and Dak kind of like returned serve this week. So now we'll see if Jalen can hold serve on Sunday against the San Francisco 49ers.
Just to tie a bow on this argument, though, because I should say this too. Like, okay, like you're sitting there, you're like, well, I missed everything. What do I do now? Like I watched the game last night. He looks awesome. I think this is like the worst possible time in human history to bet Dak Prescott to win MVP. I mean, you couldn't imagine a worse time. It's as big a pop as you can possibly have, as big a price drop as you can possibly have. You're at the end of it. So like we're done now. Like there's nothing else. That now they're playing the coin flip game. Like you were already there. Like I would never, ever, ever tell someone to bet him right now. I think the really interesting thing is, well, like if Hurts loses, the price is going to drop. But Hurts, again, we're talking about coin flip games. Like the idea that like you need a coin flip to kind of go in your direction. San Francisco's a 3-point favorite, Dallas would be a 3-point favorite, but like I think the Eagles are very live in both games.
Like Purdy could be awesome in the game. He's 10 to 1
be fair,
right now.
though, I do think what last night did a little bit is it really, I think it very clearly separates Dak and Purdy in terms of candidates, in terms of the discussion about them. And I know people are going to be like, well, that's because Dak just played. If Purdy plays and he does the same thing will happen. I'll bet you a lot of money it doesn't happen.
Agreed.
If it plays out the same way.
Common sense says that also, I think. I think
that game's not going to be covered the same way. Last night's game was solely about this. That game Sunday is about, it's too important. It's about a lot of things. And he will be one of the central figures in it, but it's the Eagles are in the game. He's not the only central figure in the game. It just won't be covered the same way, whether you think that's fair or not. And I would also emphasize this, because we shared some stuff back and forth, Nick, and I see some stuff out there. As we come down to the stretch of award season, just like to remind people, like if you see somebody make a case for a bet, and especially starting like right now, or like in the next couple weeks, and the case for a bet on an award, Heisman, NFL awards, anything that's like coming up soon that's coming down to the finish line. And the case is like what that person thinks should happen. Like, oh, well, he's first in this and he's first in this. They're doing it wrong. Don't listen to them. Disregard anything that they're saying. Doesn't matter. Like all you should be singularly focused on now with both of these markets, Heisman and then NFL awards, especially NFL, really starting this weekend, but especially next week, Just listen to what the voters are saying. The people who cover the league, what are they telling you they're going to do? It is, as an awards bettor or someone who bets into these markets, who cares what you think? You don't vote. What you think is irrelevant. You're stupid. I'm stupid. I don't matter. I'm not an important part of the proceedings. I would like to identify the people who are important parts of the proceedings and pick their brain on what they think. What are they writing about? What are they talking about? Who do they think should win? So, like, even if you think Dak MVP is like stupid, we're at the point of the season where your opinion doesn't matter, and neither does mine. Like, they're talking about it, therefore it matters. So I'm kind of excited to talk to you about this ACC championship game with Florida State and Louisville. Seems like the status of projected Florida State starter Tate Rodemaker may end up going up to kickoff in concussion protocol, as is the case with most college injuries. Like, we really don't know a lot about what's going to happen here. So obviously, if you know for sure what's going to happen, feel free to share with us. Brock Glenn, who played very sparingly this year, would be the backup quarterback this year, or would be the starter, sorry, if Rodemaker was unable to go. So Florida State, about a 1.5 point favorite. We don't really know whether the quarterback's going to play, but you have a strong opinion on the game. I think that's interesting. What is it?
I don't care who's at quarterback. In fact, I think, honestly, they might be better with Brock Glenn, who was a four-star recruit out of Covington, Tennessee. You know, Florida State swooped in at the last minute. He was going to go to one of the Big Ten powers. Glenn was looking at Michigan and Ohio State. So it's not like this kid is, you know, some bum off the street, and they've been coaching him up, and they do feel confident about Brock Glenn. But if it's Rodemaker or Glenn, to me, Ken, it's not really that big of a drop-off. I look at the drop in the point spread, and I see a number that opened Florida State 6.5, and now we're down to 1. And to me, it's just an ultimate buy low on the more talented team with more NFL players. They've got 3 guys in the front 7 at Florida State who are going to play on Sundays, probably next year. I wasn't going to lay 3. I wasn't going to lay 4. But the fact that I can lay 1 at multiple sports books in America right now with what I believe is the better team, I just have to do it. It's an auto buy on the right price. It's weird, too, because I sort of want Florida State out of the playoff picture. You know, I think the perfect playoff would be Oregon West, Texas South, Michigan Midwest, and Georgia Southeast. That would be the best playoff maybe we've ever had. But I don't like Louisville to beat Florida State. I know there are issues at Florida State offensively, but Louisville still has to score on Florida State. And to me, that is the deciding factor in the game. I like the Noles.
We've had a lot of people on. I think a lot of people are on Alabama, just that we have on the show, not like the public or anything. I like Georgia in the game. I just think like they're going to have a hard time. Alabama's going to have a hard time scoring. What do you make of this market where Georgia's about a 5.5 point favorite? Pretty high total, but these teams have played some high scoring games previously.
Ken, it's such an interesting game. You know, this Bama team kind of reminds me of the one 2 years ago where they barely escaped the Iron Bowl and Jordan Hare. Bryce had to lead them on a 99-yard drive. They force overtime. They win it in 4 OTs. They come into the SEC title game against Georgia. They're 6-point dogs. People kind of like Georgia in the game. They're split because you're getting this many points with Saban, and then Bama rolls. And it feels like kind of that similar type game in that spot. I will say, I've thought, you know, during this 29-game win streak, if you're going to beat Georgia, you kind of need 3 things. You need your quarterback to play really well. You look at Ohio State when they played Georgia last year with Stroud, or that SEC title game 2 years ago with Bryce. Both were fantastic in that game. You need your offensive line to play really well. If you can't block Georgia, you can't beat them. The third thing you need, though, and the reason why teams can't beat them, is I think you need 2 elite wide receivers. You know, most teams around the country, they have good quarterback play. They have good O-line. If you don't have 2 wideouts that can give Georgia issues, you can't beat them. I mean, you saw that in the Ohio State game when Marvin Harrison and Emeka Ibuka were out there. They were winning that game. Marvin gets hurt. Georgia comes back and win. You look at when Bama played them twice 2 years ago in the SEC title game, when they had Mechie and Jamison Williams, they beat them, then they played them in the Natty, and they lost. So I like the spot for Bama. You're not getting Saban many times as this big an underdog. I just worry if there's going to be that receiver who's going to emerge for him. Jermaine Burton is their number 1, used to play at Georgia, so you would think he's going to, you know, have a big game against his former team. Maybe it's Isaiah Bond, the guy who caught the touchdown in the Iron Bowl. Maybe it's Kendrick Law. It's Alabama. Obviously, they have talented receivers, 4-star, 5-star guys. I like them plus the points. I like them on the money line. I think they can win the game, but That's going to be the key if they can find a receiver that's going to emerge to help out Burton in the passing game.
There's a phenomenal Football Friday. Football because we're getting soccer bets for the weekend with our pal Anthony DeBundo from the Wonder Goal podcast and the Action Network. Anthony on Twitter at Anthony DeBundo. Check out his soccer betting podcast, Wonder Goal, wherever you find your podcasts. My friend, let's go top of the table here and talk about Arsenal taking on Wolves this weekend. What about Arsenal and Wolves?
Yeah, so the injury/suspension situation isn't great for Wolves. Pedro Neto is still going to be out. They're going to be without Mario Lemina and Joao Gomez, two of their three preferred midfielders. So I do think Arsenal has a pretty easy route to controlling this match and should win relatively comfortably at home. But look, Wolves have been kind of the underdog of choice. If you're a fan of betting underdogs in the Prem this year, they beat Manchester City. They beat Tottenham. They got 2 goals against Newcastle at home in a draw. They've been very competitive when they've gone up in class kind of against these other top teams, scored early on Liverpool, and ultimately lost. I do think they are undervalued to get on the board here. The market has started to overreact now to how dominant Arsenal's been defensively. They have conceded just 2.5 XG in their last 6 matches, including 2 near shutouts, complete shutouts against Sevilla and against Sheffield. They've played some pretty weak competition in the last month, Arsenal has. And so I do think there is a little bit of we've hit the top of the market. I'm not going to say anything bad about Arsenal's defense because it's so dominant, been the best in Europe. But I think now, Wolves only minus 110 to score with, some other attacking options around Neto being better. I do think they'll get on the board here. So I took some Wolves team total. I'm not too confident in their defense holding up. Arsenal finally healthy, have their top 5 attackers all on the pitch this weekend. And they did score 6 in the midweek with those 5 all healthy for the first time. So trending up for Arsenal offensively, but this defense starting to get to the top of the market.